Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps keep these stories coming. And while you're here, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. Now sit back, relax, and let's get into the story. 28 years. That's how long it's been since the outbreak reduced the world to ash and silence. The calendar stopped mattering around year 5, but I've kept track. Carved each day into the steel wall of the tunnel junction beneath what used to be Pittsburgh. That's where I live now. Not because it's safe. Nothing's really safe anymore, but because it's forgotten. Quiet, and quiet is life. My name is Nathan Keller. I was 29 when the outbreak started. I'm 57 now, one of the last original survivors from the old world still breathing. Back then, I was a senior electrical technician with Duquesne Light, working mostly substation grids and emergency restoration teams. Now I'm just another relic with stories no one really wants to hear. If there were still ears to listen. I'm recording this into a hand-cranked Olympus digital recorder still works, somehow. Found it in a derailed CSX shipping car buried under the collapsed hillside near Trafford. This is for whoever comes next, if anyone ever does. If you're hearing this, then maybe humanity deserves a second chance, or maybe you're just here to loot my corpse. Either way, listen. The first reports came out of central Missouri. Not that the media got it right. Aggressive rabies variant. Isolated neurological syndrome. By the time CDC operatives showed up in Jefferson City, entire blocks had already gone dark. No contact, no signals, then silence. I remember the moment I realized it wasn't just another health scare. It was October 17th, 1997. I was on a service call near the Neville Island substation outside Pittsburgh. Strange voltage spikes on the old 138 kV transmission loop. My crew chief radioed in something about National Guard movements being rerouted. Said there was talk of regional lockdowns across the Ohio River Valley. We didn't believe it. Why would we? Every flu, every gas leak, every damn thing was always lockdown imminent on the news. But then I saw the helicopters, not state police, not military either. Black, unmarked twin rotors, they flew low over the river like they were hunting something. By the next morning, Pittsburgh was under containment guidance. That's what the emergency alert said. Everyone was told to stay indoors, secure homes, and await National Guard distribution teams. Problem was, there weren't any teams. Not for us. Not for most cities. By the time they realized how fast it spread, the Guard was already overrun in Cincinnati and Columbus. There weren't enough soldiers left to save Pittsburgh. That's when the noise started. We were still holed up in my apartment in East Liberty when the panic set in. I lived on the 4th floor of an old industrial walk-up next to a converted paper mill. My neighbor, Jody Templin, a nurse from UPMC Shadyside, had dragged her niece and a retired firefighter named Graham into the building. She knew things, said hospitals were collapsing. Emergency channels were being jammed, not by interference, by sheer volume. Too many calls, not enough people left to answer them. Graham was the first to call them rot heads. We didn't know what to call them back then. Not really dead, not really alive. They were people once, but something in them had turned off everything except motor control and hunger. You could hit one with a bat until the skull was soup, and the damn thing would still drag itself toward the noise. The only thing that worked was breaking the brainstem. Jody confirmed that from her ER shift. Clean trauma to the medulla, she said. That's what killed them. Bullets were scarce, and headshots weren't easy under pressure. We learned fast. Sharpened steel rebar, aluminum tent poles with filed ends, sledgehammers, quiet tools. By November, we were down to 6 people in the building. Me, Jody, Graham, her niece Ava, and a pair of brothers from the 3rd floor, Dean and Marcus, HVAC guys. Real blue-collar types. They'd rigged up a rain catch system on the roof using old AC condenser shells and cut gutter pipe. We filtered water through sand, carbon, and activated charcoal they'd pilfered from aquarium shops. Survival was math. Simple math. Calories in, waste out. Silence always. Winter was hell. Pittsburgh winters are brutal in the hills. No gas, no heat, and even with all our hoarded blankets, 2 of us nearly froze to death in late December. Ava caught something, not the virus, thank God, but a deep respiratory infection. No antibiotics. Jody tried everything. Warm compresses, honey and boiled pine resin. Nothing worked. She made it to January 4th before her lungs gave up. We buried her in the alley behind the building, wrapped in a tarp, weighted with stones. Couldn't risk drawing attention with anything resembling a ceremony. Jody didn't speak for 2 days after that. Just stared at the spot where we'd boarded the window shut. I think she knew what was coming. We all did. By March, the food ran dry. Our last can of black beans split 6 ways. Dean wanted to make a run to the old Giant Eagle store off Center Avenue, but it had been ransacked months earlier. Even if there was anything left, going above ground during daylight was suicide. The rotheads were slower in cold, but they were still out there, always listening. That's when I made the call. I knew about the municipal tunnel system beneath the city. Years ago, I'd helped retrofit electrical lines and backup fiber routing beneath the central grid tied to the old B&O rail tunnels running beneath the river. If we could make it there, we might find stable shelter, maybe even emergency stores the city forgot about. It was a gamble, but we were out of options. We left that building on March 17th, 1998, 7 miles on foot, through abandoned storm drains and subway shells. Marcus almost didn't make it, slipped trying to cross the lower PWSA vault near Highland Park, broke his leg in 3 places. Graham carried him for the last mile. None of us said it, but we all knew Marcus wouldn't survive long. We reached the Duquesne Underground substation at 3:22 a.m., just in time to hear the sirens go quiet for the last time. After that, no more broadcasts, no FEMA signals, no static, just a long, dead hum. The grid was finally gone. The years that followed blurred together. Cities fell, then nations. Most of what remained scattered into enclaves, cannibal groups, and tribes. Some folks tried to rebuild mostly military holdouts in fortified zones. Didn't last. Some were overrun. Others fell apart from the inside. Power struggles, food shortages, infighting. The living were always more dangerous than the dead. I moved through the tunnels for a long time, stayed alive by staying invisible, ate rats, mouldy beans, whatever I could scavenge. Once found a pallet of old MREs in a train car near Greensburg's salt brick beef and chalky peanut paste. But it kept me alive for weeks. Learned to trap pigeons, filter water through layers of broken coal and river rock. It's not clean, but it's enough. Eventually, I stopped moving. The junction under the East Busway, near the old Bloomfield Bridge, had a reinforced service area solid doors. A few working lights on a backup battery. I sealed it up, made it mine, called it home. I've lived here alone for 16 years, but that changed 6 days ago. It started with noise, not the kind that keeps you awake, not groans or echoing footsteps. This was different, metal on metal, soft, intentional. Someone was alive down here. I tracked it for 2 days, moving slow, like I used to when I was hunting rats. Whoever it was, they were careful, smart. They didn't use lights, didn't call out. Just small taps pipe against wall, at junction intervals. Morse code maybe, or some pattern I didn't know. I'd always assumed I was the only one left down here. Pittsburgh's underground was a labyrinth of steam tunnels, overflow drains, decommissioned rail corridors, and municipal service lines built piecemeal since the 1890s, patched through the WPA and forgotten by the 90s. The floodplain down here shifts depending on the Monongahela's level, and collapse hazards are everywhere. If someone was surviving in this maze, they either knew it like I did or were reckless enough to die in it. The tapping stopped around the old access gate beneath Liberty Avenue, near the rusted valve junction for the main steam line. I waited for 3 hours, pressed flat behind a stack of retired conduit pipes, barely breathing. The air was dense, you could taste the rust and stagnant runoff clinging to every breath. I kept my hand on the handle of my rebar spear, its end ground flat against a chunk of granite years ago, still sharp enough to pierce a skull if needed. But it wasn't needed. At 2:47, I saw her again. She moved like a shadow across the broken tiles, ducking beneath a half-collapsed support arch. I caught only fragments, small frame, oversized jacket tied at the waist with old paracord, and what looked like a canvas courier bag slung over one shoulder. She paused at the far end of the tunnel, placing a single gloved hand against the wall. Tap, tap, tap. Then she slipped through a crack in the brickwork and was gone. I waited another hour before moving. Following someone underground in total darkness is a recipe for a broken leg or a cracked skull. But I'd mapped this place better than anyone alive. I counted bricks, remembered echoes, noted the faint pressure shifts in the air where side vents were still open. I wasn't chasing her, not yet. I was learning her route, and from the looks of it, she was heading deeper, toward the stormwater nexus under the old strip district. That area had flooded badly after the sewer collapse in 02. No one had used it in decades. That's what worried me. No one should have been able to get through there without full gear breather mask, waders, chemical gloves. I'd sealed off that stretch myself 15 years ago after watching a raccoon go blind and stagger into a drainage sump from exposure. And yet this girl had moved through it clean, fast, intentional. Either she'd found a dry route I missed, or she wasn't human. And I didn't believe in ghosts. The next night, I laid a trap. Nothing lethal, just an old tension snare I'd built from salvaged brake cable and a spring from a bike shock. Set it between two steam duct panels near the southern crawl route. If she used that passage again, she'd hit it. At 3:12, I heard it go off. What followed was not the shriek of an infected caught by surprise, nor the chaos of a wild animal. It was a single curse muttered through clenched teeth, then silence. I emerged slowly, lantern off, eyes straining through the grainy green tint of my night vision monocular. She was there, caught around the ankle, struggling with a knife no longer than my finger. I stepped into the corridor and cleared my throat, voice low and calm. "Don't move, you'll tear the cable deeper." She froze, eyes wide. Not feral, not panicked, just calculating. "I'm not going to hurt you," I said, raising both hands and keeping my spear lowered. "You've been through worse. Let me cut you loose." She didn't answer, just watched me like a cornered animal, eyes flicking between my face and my weapon. I could see now she wasn't older than 17, maybe 18. Pale skin smudged with soot, hair tied back with what looked like old copper wire. Her boots were military surplus from the old US Northern Command, judging by the split tread. Everything about her was salvaged, improvised, survivalist. I crouched, pulled a folding multi-tool from my belt and clipped the snare cable just below the clamp. Her ankle was bleeding, not deep, but enough to slow her if she didn't clean it. She watched me the entire time, lips pressed into a hard line. "What's your name?" I asked. She hesitated. "Wren, like the bird?" A pause, then reluctantly, a nod. I gave her my name, Nathan. Told her I'd been down here for years, alone, that I hadn't seen another uninfected human in over a decade. She didn't react, just pulled her leg free, winced, and stood on it like she'd been hurt worse before. I offered her water from my flask, triple filtered and iodine treated. She sniffed it before drinking. Smart. We sat in silence for a while, across from each other in that rusted out utility junction. Eventually, she broke it. "You live in the East Tunnels?" I nodded. "Mid-level power junction under the busway." Her eyes narrowed. "You're the one who rigged the floodgate at Sector 9. So she'd seen my work, maybe even walked through it. "You've been mapping the tunnels," I said. "Those tap patterns, that was you?" She nodded once. "Tagging safe routes, for others." That gave me pause. "What others?" Wren stood slowly, testing her ankle, then slung her bag over her shoulder. "They're not far," she said, "but they're running out of time." She wouldn't say much more after that, but I followed her. We moved west through sections of the system I hadn't touched in years. A collapsed mail chute, a dry conduit running beneath the old Heinz plant, and a gravity-fed runoff basin that led us straight to the nexus under Penn Avenue. The smell hit first mildew, dried blood, and something worse beneath it. Infection, old infection, stale, but still lingering. What we found wasn't a camp. It was a tomb. 7 people, all huddled in what had once been a dry electrical vault. They were in rough shape. 3 were alive barely. One man, probably mid-30s, had a gash across his ribs sealed with melted plastic and bike tire patches. A woman in her 50s coughed blood into a rag. The last survivor was a boy no older than 10, silent and blank-eyed, skin pale from months underground. Wren moved to them like she belonged there, checked their dressings, adjusted a jury-rigged heat pack made from a cracked lithium battery and foil. She'd kept them alive, somehow barely. I knelt beside the older man. "What happened?" He looked at me like I was a hallucination, then his eyes sharpened. "North Point base fell." I froze. North Point was a military salvage zone near Erie, one of the last known holdouts with working radio and solar arrays. I'd only ever heard static on those frequencies, but I assumed it was still standing. This man's face told me it wasn't. "When?" He didn't speak. Wren did. 3 weeks ago, hit at night. Something new. My gut turned cold. "Rot heads?" "No," she said. "Smarter, quieter. They got through perimeter without tripping alarms." That was impossible. Every infected I'd ever seen moved on instinct. Loud, clumsy, reactive. What she described was tactical. "Maybe raiders," I offered. Wren shook her head. "They don't leave survivors." That line stuck with me. I spent the next 2 nights helping Wren treat the wounded, reinforce their shelter, and check the perimeters for breaches. I shared what little food I had. Old jerky, dried lentils, a sealed can of peaches I'd been saving for my last meal. It felt like the right time. On the 3rd day, the boy died in his sleep. No noise, no flailing, just a final exhale and stillness. Wren didn't cry. She wrapped him in a mylar blanket and carried him to a culvert tunnel, then sealed the entrance with 2 feet of concrete chunks. I helped. We didn't speak during it. That night, I asked her why she stayed. Why not keep running? Her answer was simple. Because if they're changing, hiding won't work. She believed something new had emerged, a variant of the infection that retained more than just base motor function, something that could plan, adapt, and if it existed, then the deep tunnels wouldn't be safe much longer. I didn't want to accept it. I'd spent nearly 2 decades below the surface, surviving on routine and predictability. The infected were brutal, relentless, but they were simple. They followed sound, heat, motion. They never hesitated, never thought. I'd bet my life on that for years, and I was still breathing because of it. But if Wren was right, then every rule I lived by down here was suddenly obsolete. She wasn't speaking from fear or speculation. She spoke like someone who had seen it firsthand. When I pressed her about what had happened at North Point, she didn't give me much, just fragments. She and the others had been let into the perimeter 2 weeks before the attack. She'd been part of a logistics chain running salvaged tech and spare parts between enclaves. North Point was better equipped than most, with actual perimeter sensors, solar shielding, even shortwave repeaters. They had motion sensors, pressure plates, thermal imaging. The place was built like an old NORAD bunker, and yet, it fell. No alarms, no advance warning. They simply woke up to find the outer buildings burning and the gates wide open, bodies on the ground with no defensive wounds, ammo stockpiles untouched, communications lines severed cleanly. They didn't stumble in, Wren had said. They slipped in. They knew. The others didn't survive the escape. Only this group, the man with the stitched ribs, the older woman with the blood cough, and Wren herself. She said they barely made it out with their lives. And if these smarter infected had followed them, then they were already in the tunnels, already learning. That was why we had to move. We left the vault at midnight when the upper air pressure shifted and the scent of the river overwhelmed the stagnant humidity of the tunnels. I'd learned long ago that the infected didn't like high moisture air, probably interfered with their senses. The three of us that could still walk packed quickly. I took point, Ren in the center. The man whose name was Cal brought up the rear. The older woman, Elena, was too weak to travel. Ren stayed behind to administer the last dose of injectable glucose we'd found in a supply crate weeks back. She didn't say goodbye. Our route took us west through the old sanitary tunnels that paralleled the Allegheny. I hadn't used this stretch in years, it was too unstable. Portions of the brickwork had collapsed inward, and old gas lines twisted through the walls like vines. Some of them still hissed faintly. We moved with our lanterns off, guided only by muscle memory and faint luminescent paint I'd scrawled on junctions over a decade ago, a trick I'd borrowed from fire departments. 2 vertical lines for safe, 1 slash for collapse, a circle for breach. We didn't speak, every sound carried. I kept a metal washer on a string around my neck, letting it dangle an inch off my chest. When the air shifted or pressure changed, it would swing ever so slightly, crude, but it worked. We passed a decomposed body near the Forbes overflow inlet, long mummified, probably a scavenger from years ago. No one looked at it. By dawn, we reached the river access corridor beneath the 31st Street Bridge. From here, we had to cross the old sub-river pipeline, an ancient, narrow service catwalk bolted to the side of a 36-inch main line. It was originally built to carry electrical and data cables under the river and was never meant for foot traffic. Half of it had rusted out, no guardrails, just a 5-foot wide grate over 50 feet of slow-moving river sludge. Ren crossed first. She moved confidently, with her weight low, arms spread for balance. I followed, 1 step at a time, trying not to look down. Cal froze halfway. His breathing got erratic, classic panic response. I moved back and guided him across, step by step, hand on his shoulder. When we reached the far side, he collapsed against the wall and nodded once, silently. He wasn't a soldier, that much was clear. More like an engineer or civilian tech, but he was trying, and that counted. We climbed through the spillway exit and emerged into what used to be the rail yard flood control station, just a concrete clearing surrounded by rusted chain link and gravel. But it felt like a different planet after so many years underground. The sky was slate grey, thick with humidity, and the air smelled of oil and rain. Overgrown brush had swallowed the old tracks. A hawk circled somewhere above, and for the first time in over a decade, I saw daylight without a filter. We didn't stop to admire it. The relay station was still standing, a squat concrete blockhouse with peeling white paint and faded yellow warnings about high voltage and microwave radiation. I knew it from an old power grid schematic. It was part of the early intermodal network that used to run diagnostics along the Pittsburgh Lake Erie line. If Ren was right, the solar grid might still be supplying backup power. It seemed the front door was locked. Ren produced a hand-welded skeleton key and twisted it into the old schlag core until it gave. Inside, it smelled of dust and ozone. The battery indicators on the wall showed intermittent trickle charge. Cloudy days had slowed intake, but the capacitors were still holding power. The relay system was another story. The old Harris RF 5800 sat in the corner beneath a cracked insulation panel. I ran my fingers over the dials, feeling the dust fall away. The coaxial connection to the rooftop antenna had rusted clean through. I needed to reroute it to the secondary terminal if it wasn't corroded too. While I worked, Ren sat near the entrance, watching the tree line. She had a small revolver 5-shot Taurus, .38 special. It was clean and well maintained. I hadn't heard her fire it once. Her movements were always precise. If she had rounds, she wasn't wasting them. It took me nearly 3 hours to bypass the failed terminals, clean the connections, and power the transmitter. When I finally got signal, the spectrum was full of garbage static, pulsed frequencies, dead carriers, but on 5.579 megahertz, a faint repeating burst came through. 3 tones, pause, 2 tones, pause, repeat. Wren's eyes narrowed when she heard it. You know what that is? I didn't. Not exactly. She said it was a priority distress burst, old NATO signaling, emergency beacon looped through a secondary station, which meant someone out there still had equipment, still had protocols, still might be alive. We logged the signal and its strength, triangulated the direction with a salvaged DF loop, and confirmed it was coming from somewhere northeast, likely the upper Allegheny Basin, maybe near the old Kinzua Dam. That would explain the signal strength, high elevation, line of sight. It also made sense strategically. Hydroelectric access, remote terrain, limited road entry. The perfect place to hide if you were trying to restart something. That was when the wind shifted. I smelled them before I heard them, the coppery tang of blood and stagnant sweat carried on the breeze. Cal tensed. Wren was already on her feet, revolver raised. I moved to the doorway, spear in hand, but what emerged from the brush wasn't a horde, it was one. At first glance, it looked like any infected clothes in tatters, skin pallid and sunburnt in streaks, eyes clouded by necrosis. But it didn't lurch, it didn't howl, it stood still, watching, then it crouched, not like an animal, like a soldier. Wren fired first clean shot to the temple. The thing dropped, no sound, just impact and silence. But it wasn't over. Behind us we heard another impact, the distinct rattle of gravel underfoot. We were surrounded. I grabbed Cal by the arm and hauled him into the station. Wren followed, covering our flank. I slammed the steel door shut and jammed a metal pry bar into the frame. There were no windows, just the old rooftop hatch. We had maybe 2-3 minutes before they breached. I rigged the transmitter to auto-broadcast our location on a loop. No words, just the signal, over and over. It was all I could think to do. If someone was out there, they needed to hear us now. Then the first impact hit the door. Not a charge, not brute force, just a steady, repeated pressure, something probing, measuring. They didn't just want in, they were testing us. I locked eyes with Wren. Her jaw was clenched, hands steady. She handed me her last 2 rounds, said nothing. Outside, the second impact came louder this time, then silence. Not the comforting kind, the calculating kind. If we die here, let this recording survive, let someone find it, because the old plague was never the end, it was just the start. Something else has come out of it, not just the infected, something worse. We had maybe 15 seconds of silence after that second impact on the relay station's steel door. In the tunnels, I had learned how to read quiet, the kind that hung in the air like pressure before a storm. This wasn't retreat, it was coordination. I looked at Wren, and she already knew. We both crouched and moved for the rooftop hatch, the only other exit. Cal followed, still limping from an old wound that never healed right, gripping the last emergency light in his shaking hands. The hatch hadn't been used in years. I twisted the rusted bolt while Wren scanned the corners of the room. Something above us creaked, not from wind. It was deliberate, a shift of weight on sheet metal, testing, like the sound of someone walking along a roof without wanting to be heard. The bolt finally gave, but the hatch barely budged. I shoved it with my shoulder, and it scraped open just enough for Wren to slip through. That's when the third strike hit the door, not a knock, but a blow with precision. It landed exactly on the latch seam. A second one followed, exactly the same force, same location. The door flexed. They weren't just strong, they were methodical, working the stress points. I shoved Cal up and out of the hatch next, then climbed through as the pry bar snapped below. The last thing I saw before I sealed it behind us was the edge of a pale hand gripping the frame. We moved across the roof in a crouch, ducking beneath the antenna tower. I looked out across the rail yard weeds 3 feet high between rusted tracks, piles of rail ties, collapsed utility sheds, but no movement. Whatever had flanked us was already out there, waiting. They'd surrounded the structure without making a sound, no moaning, no screaming, just pure silence. That was what haunted me most. We dropped off the west side of the roof and landed in a ditch filled with loose ballast. I rolled my ankle hard but kept moving. Ren led the way, threading us through stacked shipping containers until we reached a maintenance culvert that ran parallel to the rail yard fence. It was choked with vines and half collapsed, but it was enough cover to get us to the tree line. When we finally crossed under the rusted chain link, I turned back once. Nothing followed us. No footsteps, no noise. Just the relay building behind us, its door now slightly ajar. Not torn open, not battered down, just open. That was the moment I stopped thinking of them as infected. Whatever they were now, they weren't mindless anymore. We moved north that night. No lights, no fire. Just the faint path of the old Route 65 corridor, which we followed until it narrowed near Emsworth. The road was gone in places. Flood damage had taken its toll years ago, and parts of the hillside had slid into the valley below. We kept to the high ground, following the tree line. For the first time in years, I started seeing signs of what used to be. Old mailboxes swallowed by ivy. Power poles still leaning into each other like drunks too tired to fall. A rusted school bus, half collapsed on its side, with trees growing through the windows. It felt like walking through a museum built by ghosts. By the second day, we reached the hills south of Butler. That's where we ran into our first living humans in weeks. A flare-red, short burn arced into the sky near a water tower at the edge of a dried-out reservoir. Ren stopped in her tracks, stared at it, then took out a small receiver from her bag, a handheld spectrum analyzer. She tuned it to the emergency frequency and nodded once. The same burst signal we'd heard at the relay station was transmitting here, but stronger. They were close. We followed the flare trail to a collapsed fire road and through a narrow cut in the hills. That's where we saw them, 5 people, geared like they knew how to stay alive. They weren't militia or scavengers. They wore dark, unbranded clothing, light packs, suppressed weapons, military style without being military. They didn't raise their rifles when they saw us, just watched, studied us like a risk assessment. After what we'd seen, I couldn't blame them. One of them, a man in his 50s with grey at the temples and a field compass around his neck, stepped forward. He looked at Ren first, then at me. "You picked up the signal?" Ren nodded. "From the McKees Rocks relay." He exchanged a glance with the others. "Then you know, they're here." That was all he said before motioning us to follow. They took us to a hillside bunker north of Chicora camouflage netting, reinforced entry, powered by a hybrid turbine solar system buried under 2 feet of shale and loam. Inside, it was cleaner than I expected. Filtered air, working LED strips, heat. The man introduced himself as Hale, former National Infrastructure Protection Unit. Said they'd been tracking movement across western Pennsylvania for years. Not just infected groups, but something else. The first sighting was in what used to be Mercer County, infected that didn't move during the day. That waited until night, then targeted food stores, water sources, and communication nodes. No random attacks, only calculated ones. They called them shades, not because they were invisible, but because they moved like the absence of light. One of Hale's people, a woman named Vera, who'd spent years at a science outpost near Ottawa, showed us footage. Grainy infrared surveillance from a collapsed research site near Oil City. The shades didn't rush or stumble. They walked, stopped at junctions, tilted their heads as if listening, and when they found the living, they didn't attack immediately. They watched, surrounded, then vanished. Sometimes they left the bodies intact. Other times, organs removed. Not eaten, removed and arranged. The patterns matched what I'd seen years ago. The rats, the blood signs. I thought it had been madness. I thought maybe I was going mad. Now I knew better. They weren't just changing. They were learning. Ren sat across from me as Vera outlined the migration patterns. Hale paced behind her. I tried to hold the shape of the world I knew in my head, but it was collapsing. The infected we once fought, those were version 1. Hostile but predictable. But these These were evolving along a separate branch. Selective traits reinforced, behavioral learning passed down. Maybe not through genes, maybe through mimicry, observation, group response. They avoided infrared, learned how to dampen their own body heat. They moved in silence, killed strategically, left bait, used patterns. One theory suggested they were watching survivors and adapting in response, like they were studying us. That was when Hale revealed the real reason for the signal. It wasn't a distress call. It was bait. They had started broadcasting it 6 months ago after discovering the patterns of the shades were drawn toward electromagnetic activity, radio, solar arrays, battery spikes. The shades weren't just avoiding fire and noise. They were hunting electromagnetic signatures. They didn't just sense us. They were tracking our tech. The signal was meant to attract them, to bring them in, so they could study the shades back. What Hale hadn't expected was that they would learn to mimic the signals. One of the repeating bursts we'd received wasn't coming from a human site at all. It was a false transmission, looped from a scavenged emergency beacon. The last place it transmitted from was Kinzua Dam. That's where they were now, not just hiding, breeding, learning, preparing. We had a choice: stay in the bunker and go dark, hope they passed over, or go to Kinzua and destroy the transmitter, whatever was feeding the looped signal. No one spoke for a long time. Then Wren stood. If we wait, they'll come anyway. Hale nodded. He already knew. They gave us gear, suppressed carbines, thermal cloaks, iodine, and a sealed hard drive to record anything we found. The trip would take 4 days by trail, 5 if the forest roads were gone. Cal stayed behind. He wasn't in any shape to move, but he gave me the recorder I'm using now and told me to speak into it whenever I had something worth saying. So here I am. We leave tonight. If we make it, we'll find Kinzua. If we don't, this will be my last recording. But understand this: the world didn't end 28 years ago. It shifted. Something took root in the ruins of what we left behind. Something born of the virus, but shaped by time, silence, and observation. They are not the infected we knew. They are not the dead. They are the future. And if we don't stop them now, they won't just inherit the earth. They'll reshape it in their image. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like and subscribe. Your support keeps these creepypastas coming. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and never ignore the feeling that something is watching.